welcome to a little video about Target 6C. So Target 6C deals with confidence intervals and margins of error. So confidence intervals we calculate by adding and subtracting the margin of error with a sample mean or sample proportion. Now, we do this because a confidence interval gives us a nice range where we can estimate a population's mean or the population's average, its proportion, will be. So we can say it with 95% confidence for our lessons. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to determine a margin of error with 95% confidence. If you think back to our standard deviation lessons, that is 2 standard deviations out from the mean. So that covers a pretty significant area, so our estimate of that range will be pretty good. Our mean will be somewhere in there. The formula that we use for margin of error when we have a sample mean is right in front of us. The margin of error equals 2 times S, which stands for our standard deviation, and N, which is our sample size. Calculate this, add it, subtract it from our sample mean, and we'll have our range. Let's take a look at this problem. Principal Kavanaugh is interested in how much time students spend online each day. A sample of 75 students responded to a survey about the amount of time they spend online each day. The sample mean was 3.2 hours and the standard deviation was 0.9 hours. Let's create a confidence interval. First, let's highlight what we have. Our standard deviation was given to us as 0.9 of an hour. The sample mean was found to be 3.2 hours. We'll use that later. And then the sample that we have is 75 students. Let's do the sample mean in blue. I didn't mean to select mean. Okay, back to this video. Let's calculate that margin of error. All right, so on top we have S, our standard deviation. On the bottom, we have a square root of our sample. Right, I plugged that into my calculator and I got 0.21. Okay, so what I'm going to do is add and subtract 0.21 from 3.2. And that's our sample mean that I'm adding and subtracting from. So 2.99 and 3.41. Whoa. Okay, so I'm not done with this yet. I want to write out my answer. My answer is oh, that's tiny. Let's make that font a little bigger, shall we? We are 95% confident that our population mean, wow, is between 2.99 hours and 3.41 hours. So it's somewhere in between those two values based on the mean of the sample that was taken. Now, sometimes the data that we have isn't amounts of hours or calories in food. Sometimes these are yes or no questions. In this case, what we do is we use a margin of error for proportions. It's the same idea. We're still using a sample size, which is our N. However, this time we're looking at a proportion instead of a mean. So let's take a look at a problem that involves a proportion instead of a mean. The idea of a confidence interval is the same. We're still adding and subtracting. So, a survey given to a random sample of 100 voters in the US to ask about their preference for a presidential candidate. Of those, 61% of the people said they preferred candidate A. Let's determine a 95% confidence interval. First, let's highlight. The easiest thing for me to see here is my sample size, right? It's 100 voters. Next, I need to find my proportion. Well, the proportion is how much of the 100 voters preferred candidate A. Well, we're given 61% of people. That is a proportion. To remind you, proportions can be written as fractions. 61% is the same thing as 0.61, so that, I hope, something you're familiar with, which also can be written as 61 over 100. Any percentage can be written over 100. Therefore, it is a proportion. So, let's calculate. Okay, so our margin of error is 2 times. Our proportion was 61%. We need to convert percents to decimals when we put them into problems. And then 1 minus that same proportion over our sample size. In this problem, we don't need to square root the inside, or the denominator. We're square rooting the whole fraction. So that's not too bad. Now, one thing that I like to do is I'm going to simplify those parentheses because I find it easier to enter it in my calculator this way. Okay, at this point, I plug this into my calculator and I get about, well, first I got something like this. I got 0.097, which I then, what do we have, rounding to the nearest tenth? Ooh, let's do 0.1. Okay, beautiful. Let's add and subtract. What was our population or proportion this time? 61%. Okay, let's use it. 61. We got to use this. We don't have a mean. We just have a proportion. We're going to subtract 0.1 from 61. That's 60.9. And we're going to add 0.1 to 61. So 61.1. We're almost done. We have one last thing to do, and we need to type out our sentence. And, of course, make our font bigger. Yes, Miss Gumin, let's do that. Okay, we are 95% confident that the population proportion, right, this time it's a proportion, not a mean, is between 60.9% and 61.1%. All right. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or to your teachers. Have a good rest of whatever day it is for you. Bye.